Okay guys, since we're more likely going to miss class Monday, what I thought I would do is do the photosynthesis lecture and video it for you. That way you can have it and watch it in case we do miss class. So it's the first time I'm doing this, maybe a little weird, just bear with me, okay? So we're going to start out with photosynthesis, okay? So photosynthesis. It's probably best to start out with the definition. It is a compound word, so you have photo and synthesis. Synthesis, to synthesize, is to make. So we're to make something here. And photo means light. So what photosynthesis is we're making something with light. So what are we making with light? To understand that, let's put up an equation. So this equation goes as so. CO2 plus H2O plus sunlight yields C6H12O6 plus oxygen. This equation is the equation for photosynthesis. And what it shows is that the inputs and outputs are the opposite from cellular respiration. So if you have carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight coming in, you're able to output sugar in the form of glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. Now, if we were to flip this arrow around and make it go this direction, well, obviously sunlight is not coming out of this. It's another form of energy. So we'll just put energy here. And what that is now is oxygen plus glucose. Break that down, you get energy, water, and carbon dioxide. That is cellular respiration. So you see, cellular respiration and photosynthesis go hand in hand together. So let's go ahead and erase this because we're just focusing on photosynthesis right now. So we're going to go ahead and remove that and get back on this. So carbon dioxide plus water plus sunlight yields glucose plus oxygen. So it's probably best to understand, what is sunlight then? How does sunlight function? So light can be broken down in a few different ways. We normally break it down as so. Roy G. Biv. And Roy G. Biv is an acronym that helps us remember the wavelengths of light. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. This is the visible light spectrum. It occurs in these colors. It's the colors of the rainbow. Energy increases as we move in this direction. And that is because violet has a very, very small wavelength. So what that means is violet would look something like this. Whereas red would look something like this. You see, this is a much further length in between these two waves than here. So these shorter length in between these two waves means it has more energy. So violet has more energy, indigo has a little bit less energy, so on and so forth. So red has the least amount of energy, violet has the most. So to understand a little bit about that, we have to understand how plants work. So plants use almost all of the colors except for one. And you have to think about, what color are most plants? Most plants are green. Now, the color something is all of the colors except the color that it is. That doesn't make sense, right? But it does if you think about it. This green is green because it absorbs all colors except for green light, which is reflected back to you. So when I look at, for instance, let me find you something else here. This pink tennis ball. It's all colors except for the pinks that it's reflecting back to. So it's not absorbing those colors. So when you see a green plant, it's not using green light. That's the one color of light that it's not using. It's absorbing all of these other colors and reflecting back green. So it absorbs the red, orange, yellows, the low energy wavelengths. And then it absorbs the high energy wavelengths as well, blue, indigo, and violet. So it's very important to understand how these plants actually function with light. Because where we're headed with this is where we're headed to this idea of light synthesization. Let me go ahead and get this erased for you. So remember, we're making something with light. What are we making? We're making sugars or glucose. How do we do that? Well, we do that really in two major steps. Photosynthesis can be broken down into two major steps. The first step is what we call the light reactions. The second step, dark reactions. It's here in the light reactions that we actually see where we're using light to do something with. Dark reactions, we don't need light at all. It's only in the light reactions. And this can be broken down into two things. Oops. Photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Now photosystem 2 actually happens in the process before photosystem 1. I'm not going to get into why. One was discovered before the other. That's not very important. But photosystem 2 happens first, and then photosystem 1 takes place. Okay? And what we see in the photosystems is we see the harvesting of light and the using of that light to do something with. So let me give you a quick little explanation of photosystem 2. So here's, I'm not the best artist, but I'm going to try to describe to you using some pictures here of how it looks. So I've got a few different colors here. And you can also find this in your lectures. I'm just going to reproduce it from your lectures here. It says, Light Reactions of Photosynthesis. That's the title of the lecture, or excuse me, the title of the slide in the lecture. Chapter 7 is the actual lecture one. And I'll put these up online for you so you have them. So let's start out first with light coming in. So we're going to allow this to be light. So light is coming in. And where it's going is it's going to these little complexes within the cell. And these are in the chloroplast. The chloroplast is the organelle that carries out photosynthesis in plants. And what these are on the outside is these are called antenna pigments. Like the antenna on your radio, it directs the signal. So these are all going to direct the light signal. Until you get to the major part, which is in the center. So light is going to bounce around all different ways, and it's going to intensify in the center. The center is called the reaction center, and that's where the chlorophyll molecule is going to be. Chlorophyll plays a major role. Chlorophyll is the molecule that we're going to use in photosynthesis. So the antenna pigments direct the chlorophyll molecule, or directs the light energy to the chlorophyll molecule. Now, what do we do with that light energy, you may say? Well, it gets kind of complex here. But what we're doing is we're taking an electron, which comes in right here. We're taking that electron and we're supercharging it. We're giving it lots and lots of energy. But by producing lots and lots of energy from it, it's able to fall downwards. It's able to lose that energy. But as it loses that energy, we're able to do something. We're able to create something called ATP. And if you remember from cellular respiration, ATP played a major role there as well. Because it is ATP that is the cellular currency of energy. So we're able to form ATP here with the supercharging of that electron. Where did that electron come from? Well, that electron actually comes from water. Water is over here. And what we do is we harvest the electrons off of water and we leave the waste product, oxygen. So oxygen is floating around. It's a waste product of photosynthesis. It's not used at all. So us as animals, we have evolved to use essentially the trash of plants in many ways. So oxygen is how that's how sort of oxygen is formed. And the supercharging of the electrons giving it lots and lots of energy, and we're able to create ATP. What we've described here is this is photosystem 2. Now, those same electrons get pushed over into another photosystem. So that those electrons will go on over and we'll have another photosystem over here. So it'll just be another complex of antenna pigments here, or antenna molecules, however you want to call them. They're simply pigments. They're actually the pigments that you're seeing in trees and plants right now. The yellows, the oranges, the reds, those colors that are not traditionally plant colors until the fall, those are those antenna pigments or secondary pigments. You may see them described as accessory pigments. Those are all what's directing that light to that reaction center. So again, light comes in here. So that's light. Light's directing, those antenna pigments are directing light to the reaction center. The reaction center takes those electrons, supercharges them up, okay? They fall down, just like a while ago. But instead, here, we do not make ATP. What we make here is something called NADPH. And that's another sort of energy molecule. It's like an electron carrier, like we see in the Krebs cycle, for instance, in cellular respiration. The NADHs, well, this is NADPH. It's a very similar process here. So we sort of form that right here. Okay, so that's what we're doing in photosystem 1 and 2, or the light reactions, is we're forming ATP and NADPH from electrons harvested from water, supercharged with light, using the antenna complexes on the outside and the chlorophyll molecule on the inside. Okay, so that's photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Now the dark reactions, we can give that a different term. What we're going to call those, the Calvin cycle. You may also see this carbon cycle. It can be called either one. Carbon reactions, carbon cycle, Calvin cycle, all of those are the same thing. Now, I'm not going to draw it out. And the reason that I'm not going to draw it out is it's too complex for what I'm looking for from you. I'm not interested in you knowing every single step of the Calvin cycle, just like I'm not interested in you knowing every single step of the citric acid cycle or Krebs, either one. So what I'm really interested in you understanding is inputs and outputs and the overall concept of what's happening in the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle, number one, does not need light. It's a dark reaction. It does not need light to occur. Okay. Second off, it uses the ATP in the NADPH from the photosystem 2, and this is photosystem 1. It uses the outputs of this as inputs to it. So it uses ATP, NADPH, and carbon dioxide. What it does is it uses this and it sort of turns this cycle much like the citric acid cycle, and produces glucose with it. So this is what we're actually now taking carbon and some energy molecules and some electron carriers, and we're able to produce this glucose molecule, which is a carbon molecule, C6H12O6. And it's this process where we actually synthesize. Here we're not really synthesizing first. We're harvesting light and we're transforming it into a form that these cells can use. But then we take those forms and we actually synthesize in the Calvin cycle. And again, you can see this in your notes very clearly. There's a slide titled Calvin cycle. And this is, again, same lecture, chapter 7. But the details of it are way too complex. You have things like RUBPs, which is ribosco biphosphates, and PGLs, and all this stuff that I'm not interested in you knowing. What I'm really interested in knowing is the Calvin cycle is almost like the opposite of the citric acid cycle. And what we're doing is we're inputting ATP, we're inputting NADPH, and we're getting out glucose. Whereas in the citric acid cycle of cellular respiration, you're inputting glucose and you're getting out ATP in NADH, FADH2. These are slightly different molecules, but again, they're functioning the same. So a really good way of thinking about this is photosynthesis is the opposite of cellular respiration in many, many ways. And if you look, remember the formula that we had up here a while ago, I'll rewrite it for you. Again, carbon dioxide plus H2O, or water, plus we're just going to put energy here. Okay? Yields C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus oxygen. Now again, this is a waste. So if this energy in this format is sunlight, that is photosynthesis. All you have to do here is just flip that arrow. Now you've got cellular respiration. So they truly are the opposite of one another. So you have the opposite to it, it's the sort of the inverse, if you will. Now, there are something plants must battle, especially plants that live in very hot environments, and that's called photorespiration. So what you've done is you've combined photosynthesis and respiration up. Now I'm not going to get into the complexities of this, but really what's happening is instead of using carbon dioxide in this process, they use oxygen. And oxygen does not form glucose, so they're not able to make the sugars that they need when it's really super hot. So plants sort of come up with a way of combating that. And you have three types of plants. You have, well, let me go ahead and erase this since we're done here. So the three types of plants that we're talking about here are C3 plants, C4 plants, and CAM plants. Now the majority of plants are C3 plants, like a potato, for instance, okay, or a maple tree. That's a C3 plant. And what that plant does is that plant